From Immersive Labs, this is Cyber Humanity. Hello all, I'm Chris Pace, and as always, I'm joined by ex-GovType and Immersive Labs product guy Paul Bentham.
Hello, everybody.
Blue teamer Kev, don't call me Kevin, Breen.
Don't call him Kevin.
And his dog, he's made a guest appearance already. We haven't even got into the
working from home.
The first of these we've done remotely, and Kev's dog has already made an appearance. And for the first time, I'm delighted to welcome former crack dark web detective and chief cyber sausage, don't call him an officer, Max Vector.
Hi.
Max, so we've decided to let Max on these, and to maintain some jeopardy, he might never be on it again.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes.
And I think we thought every week we might say this could be his last time. Who knows? As always, in these short podcasts, we aim to focus on the human side of cybersecurity with a bit of tech stuff thrown in, social engineering, hacker motivations, cyber crisis scenarios, all that kind of stuff. So this is the first of these podcasts that we have recorded during the lockdown. Yay, lockdown. Yeah. So it is safe to say that we all already hate Zoom. What are our general feelings about Zoom?
I've got a lot of experience on it.
Who doesn't? I was wondering if Zoom were doing any kind of tracking of who are the users who've been on the most Zoom calls. They could give that person an amazing prize.
They should have a leaderboard.
Yeah, leaderboard. Gamify that stuff, right?
I mean, obviously not, because they're big privacy concerns, and Zoom is very sincere about its privacy issues. You won't find.
Couldn't help himself. We're already into. I haven't even introduced the premise or anything. Let's talk about Zoom. So yes, over the last few weeks, the plucky little video conferencing startup that has just become suddenly central to all of our lives has come under a little bit of scrutiny. Safe to say it might have found itself in the crosshairs of the security community a little bit. But is that fair? What is all this criticism that's being leveled at Zoom? What's it all about?
So I think we start with, everybody should be aware of what Zoom is. So Zoom video conferencing, it's free and commercial, and I think that's been its biggest appeal. I think that's why it's been picked up so quickly, so rapidly. It's versatile, multi-platform, and it's free for home users, so you can just pick it up and use it, and it's kind of easy to use. What's happened in the last few weeks is that a couple of minor security vulnerabilities have been found. Don't get me wrong, they are security vulnerabilities, but from my perspective, they've been blown a little bit out of proportion. And then that caused the security community to start picking it up, start taking a deeper dive into it. And again, there have been some not insignificant findings. And then we saw just everybody going, oh my God, never use it. If you've got Zoom, you're killing the world.
Well, my personal favorite was a Guardian headline that said, Zoom is malware, say security expert.
It is malware. It means all these people keep talking to me all the time. It's ridiculous.
No,
you in video. The reason that headline came around is because after the announcement was made, and it was about a local web service that you could use to gain privilege escalation. Now, you must already have privileged access in order to do this, but Apple took the really, and I think it's the first time they've ever done this, they actually entered Zoom, that specific file, into their anti-malware tool, distributed it to every Mac, and every Mac removed that update mechanism, therefore removing the vulnerability, but classifying it as malware.
This is the one from 2019.
No, this is recent. This is recent.
Second of
Zoom
April.
deserve this then. I was all in favour of them, people are bullying Zoom, but this happened last year. I've been using Zoom for years. They did it back in 2019.
Yes, they're not the first. This isn't the first time. This isn't going to be the last time.
They deserve it.
But Cisco WebEx has almost 200 CVEs, including remote
186. 186.
There you go. What bit of software doesn't?
Exactly.
We all have them.
So yes, Zoom does have some security issues. Are they the worst things to have ever happened in the world? I don't think so.
Sorry, you said 186 CVEs in WebEx, including remote code execution. Do you want to explain why remote code execution is so bad?
Can I say no?
No, you can't say no. The rules are: I ask you questions and you answer them. That's how it goes.
So there's two kinds of things. There's like local attacks, which is usually something like privilege escalation, and those are the things we saw in Zoom. In order for those attacks to be useful, an attacker must already have access to your laptop, to your desktop. Remote code execution takes that a step further, and they can do some of the same kind of attacks, except the clue's kind of in the name. One is local, they need to be on the box. The other one's remote, which means it's easier for attackers to do that. They don't need as much user interaction.
Therefore, more exploitable.
Typically so, yes.
So the suggestion here is actually that. So this is why I got hot under the collar about the Zoom is malware. I'm not sure which security expert was foolish enough to say that. I feel like I should probably go back through the article and tell you who exactly it was who said that. But I think it's a silly thing to say. Also, the next question I'm bound to ask then is, okay, so there were 0 days and there was obviously this thing that affected the Mac app in particular. Have any of those actually been exploited? Do we know there's malware in the wild that's targeting Zoom?
It depends who you ask. Some people will say yes, and there's news reports of 0 days being up for sale. What we're actually seeing isn't an attack against known vulnerabilities. What we're seeing is attacks against poor configurations.
Oh, yeah, but then weren't there a load of things that you could configure in Zoom previously? It just wasn't obvious that you could configure them as security settings. And so now their way of patching, in inverted commas, is to add a security button that allows you to tick those boxes. But all those settings were there before.
Most of them were there before. They're just bringing them to the forefront and putting them in people's, like, directly in their eye line. So things like adding passwords and things of that nature.
Great PR. That's great PR. Good work, Zoom.
And this has led to something that we're seeing called Zoom bombing or Zoom raiding. And what this is people are either accidentally or deliberately publishing their meeting IDs and sometimes their passwords into things like Twitter and sharing. And then if they're public, anybody can jump into those rooms. There's a funny thing I saw on Twitter the other day where some kid in his maths class said it's kind of boring, so he published the Zoom ID and the password and asked everybody to jump in and liven up his math class.
The Zoom ID thing is the same as the government the Cobra meeting. Isn't that what they did?
They took a screenshot saying, look, Boris is running his cabinet meeting over Zoom, and in the top left-hand corner, you can see the meeting ID. I'd like to hope they have a password, which would have...
Yeah, it had a password. It was Cobra Meeting 1.
I love Boris.
Okay, I knew there was a no politics rule on the... I didn't think I'd have to make a no politics rule because we're all grown-ups, but no politics on the podcast, please.
So fun aside, like the kid asking people to bomb his math class is funny, but we've also seen people leaking things like Alcoholics Anonymous and like women only events and things of that nature as well. So there is a darker side to that kind of abuse as well, and it's not all like deliberately malicious. That's some people not realizing that if they share this meeting ID, it's a very public thing and anybody can just jump in.
I think this links to really the security of any teleconferencing or video conferencing system. I remember from LulzSec managed to hack into a police officer's email or his personal email. They had forwarded the meeting ID to his personal email the police officer had, and then LulzSec came on and recorded the whole meeting between FBI and the police, the whole operation going on into LulzSec. They managed to record and put it online, and that was years ago before Zoom. So this kind of security vulnerabilities with any tele or video conferencing stuff has been around for a long time.
Yeah, because it's treading such a fine balance between accessibility and it's in a way it's the kind of software that's treading the finest balance between those two things. Because let's say I don't use WebEx, but I'm joining a WebEx meeting with another company, there has to be a reasonably easy way for me to get authenticated to join that meeting. So I understand where the challenges come, but obviously it is a room, in the virtual sense. So we need to think about securing it in exactly the same way again.
And even more so with video, because obviously you can actually see into people's houses. So I bet there's endless stuff about people writing down passwords, or that something's on the wall, or someone's diary's up on. And I'm sure you've seen lots of videos sent around of people who kind of forget they're on the video and they go to the toilet with the laptop in there.
Or they forget that they're sharing their screen.
Yeah,
and they go to their personally favorite website.
Again, this is nothing new to Zoom. Like, Zoom is just they're the one under the spotlight at the minute. IoT webcams, IoT nanny cams, like these things have been doing exactly the same kind and arguably worse vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
It's just that Zoom is flavor of the week, and I think that's because of the situation we find ourselves in, because it is so easy, it's ubiquitous across platforms, that we're just seeing so many people using it that its attack surface has increased.
My wife refused to have a internet connected baby monitor. I thought it was a great idea because you could look at it on your phone. And I had initially, bad thing for me to admit, but I had initially said, "Oh, I think you're being paranoid about it. I'm sure it can't be that vulnerable. It's a baby monitor, for goodness sake." And then I went on to Showdown, and I was like, "Okay, we're not going to have an internet connected baby monitor. We're not going to become one of the thousands of vulnerable internet connected baby monitors."
I think it really shows the whole CIA availability. Since COVID hit, the most important thing is availability. Everyone's gone to, we need to get available working remotely as soon as possible. So obviously that's going to jeopardize the other parts of that triangle, which availability is the most important thing. So let's forget about security for now, and then we find out that security is not so good on some of these things.
The other thing that doesn't help is, and I hate this term, but it's so accurate, is fake news. Like, as soon as somebody said that there's this little thing with Zoom, and yes, it's absolutely something that is a vulnerability and should absolutely be fixed, but it was blown out of proportion, not by so much the security community, but by people at home saying, "Oh my God, you'll never believe this, Zoom is hacking me."
Oh yeah, my mum said to me that their church were not going to use Zoom anymore to have their meetings because it was insecure, and someone had read about it. Probably the Daily Mail. And so they decided that they weren't going to use it. And I was like, okay, I think that's a bit of an overreaction.
But that overreaction gets shared across social media. And then when you've got teachers and students who are trying to use this so they can continue with some semblance of life, they're now scared to use this. And they shouldn't be scared. They should be cautious. They should set things up properly, but they shouldn't be scared to use this technology.
I think that links quite nicely to the house party thing as well. I got probably 10 texts off people in 1 week saying, "I've just heard house party will hack me straight away. I've just installed it. What do I do?" And obviously the news comes out that they put out $1 million to anyone who can actually hack the app. So it doesn't seem like.
But that was all really weird. That was such a weird. That was so odd. It was like, well, this app has become incredibly popular in quite a short space. I mean, to be honest, friends were messaging me to ask me if House Party was secure, and I was replying, "What's House Party?"
I was the same. I had to look it up. I had no idea what it was.
All the
kids had started using it, and then they're asking, "Is it secure or not?" And actually, it turned out it was all House Party have said it was a gigantic hoax.
So House Party are actually Epic Games, so the same people who make Fortnite. So this isn't a small company. They acquired House Party like several months ago, I think. So this isn't a small startup that's built this app. It's a big company behind it. So they're going to take security and privacy a little bit more seriously than other people. So they offered $1 million, and it wasn't to see if they could be hacked. The $1 million was actually, we believe there's a smear campaign if you've got anything to do with this smear campaign, come tell me who told you to do it, and we'll give you the $1 million. So it's basically looking for that insider mole, that whistleblower. They're offering $1 million to a whistleblower.
You know, the other thing that this kind of brings into focus is the idea that you can get so much traction, news coverage, social sharing by implying that something is hackable, especially when it comes to a thing that people are using for their personal life. Like, who knows what is going on House Party of a weekend? Let's be honest. And once you create an environment where there's a chance that it could be hacked, or that, you know, data, people were going crazy about it. Yeah, it was fascinating.
The one thing I will say about House Party, so like I said, I didn't know what it was. I had to like go grab a copy and have a look and see what it was all about. And whilst there's nothing to say that it could be hacked, its privacy settings were like really badly buried. It's very hard to tell whether you are still streaming or not. So you could background the application thinking you closed it, and it was still streaming, and anybody can join a room.
Yeah, it does actually. That's what I did that to my friends when I joined House Party. You can just join their room, and their video pops open, and they're like, "Oh, sorry, I didn't realize I turned it on." And that is like the
they don't have to answer it or anything. It just turns
the default settings just let you in.
I think Zoom used to do that, though. I think that's how Zoom was originally set by default. And again, this is what Kev's saying. It's not necessarily to do with the job that a thing does. It's to do with how it's configured. So if it's configured, for example, that Zoom is set up to automatically show your video when you log in, not have a password to protect, for people to be able to log in and change their names so that they can sort of melt into the background sometimes. I think, there are obviously concerns about configuration because it's not been considered. No one's thinking about that. They're thinking about how can we interact when we're 100 miles apart. That's what we're thinking about.
The trouble is with these tools is that they've gone from being used by people who use them all the time, like Zoom. Like, I don't know what the usage figures have gone. They must be through the roof, right? But people who were using Zoom were used to using Zoom. Zoom's got its own set of problems, but House Party must have been like the people who it was designed for use playing around. It then becomes this kind of central tool for us all to use. And of course, it's like digital transformation overnight. That's what most businesses are experiencing. And none of the policy processes, checks, balances, guidance. Imagine if the whole world started doing teleconferences. Like, there was no security. Who put a PIN code on a teleconference before? Like, you could have just dialed into any of them. But who would want to subject themselves to that? I mean, dear, oh dear.
I mean, the other thing is, of course, that Zoom, everything to do with Zoom is now much bigger than it was a month ago. One of which being their share price. I read a hilarious article about there's another company called Zoom Technologies. It's a Chinese company. I don't even know what it does. It's tiny, apparently. But loads of investors were mistakenly investing in this Chinese technology company. So much so that the SEC in America had to stop trading of this Chinese Zoom company because they were getting all this investment that people didn't really mean to invest. The whole world's gone absolutely insane. Okay, I think we've covered Zoom. Essentially, it sounds to me like it was a bit of a storm in a security researcher's teacup. Does anyone want to disagree? Does anyone want to tell me Zoom is malware?
Zoom's definitely not malware. Zoom definitely has some vulnerabilities. They should definitely be fixed. You should definitely be careful. But is it as bad as, oh my God, you've got to remove it from your device and never use it again? I don't think so.
No, and I think because we haven't seen that level of exploitability yet that would lead us to a place where we think it's any more risky than Microsoft Word, for example, which is the most exploited bit of software that there is. I'm sure everyone's still using that every day.
I think there is something just before you move on, Chris, but there is something a little bit more. I think when you're doing something with audio and you're doing something with video and you're doing it in homes, I wonder if that's the thing that's really changing. That's the thing that maybe ticks it into mainstream. Like, it's like the baby monitor example you used before. Like, if I put a webcam at work, and somebody hacks it. That's a bit annoying. You put a webcam in my baby's room, that's a whole different level. And I think that Zoom, this isn't the first time. Like, there was the web server is malware problem back in 2019, where I was, a Mac exploit, and Apple deleted it. Zoom had pre-warning here, and I know that they've put the whole product team onto security in the last few weeks. But there's an issue here, which is like, I think overnight their lack of investment or lack of focus, perhaps, in security, it can't have been their number one priority. It is now, but it can't have been before, understandably. And it's now been invited into our homes. That's leveled up.
Yeah, the things that I suppose the argument might be, if I'm using Microsoft Word and I decide not to open a document with a macro in it because I know the risk that it presents, that's different to I'm now effectively being forced to use a tool. Like my mum's church is the perfect example. I'm forced to use a tool that I wouldn't normally use. That tool now is being used in my home. My face is on it and my voice is on. I can see how the visceral reaction to that is such that it is, and you can also see how it ends up in the mainstream.
And then the mainstream media can amp it, right?
Yeah, which of course they do. But to your broader point, it's more interesting. Basically, the whole idea that Zoom might consider the importance of security in the whole development of the product. It is potentially a more interesting question. We don't have enough information to really know, like, how much investment were they making before this point? Is it another case of a vendor gets hacked, is wise after the event? Who knows? And it'll hurt them.
The last piece of that puzzle is just the fact that, like you said, everyone is using it in their homes, may have not used it before. Even if in a work context, has anyone had Zoom training on Zoom and how to do it in a safe way, from everything from, so you can't show what's on your on your wall behind you or whatever, that there's a whole side of the human element where is completely outside the technology that people there's no time for training or anything like that, because you're all at home the day after you've been told to go home.
If you even just look at it in our company, right? We consider ourselves a security company. We've been using Zoom for years. Like, it was only recently when, instead of it being a subsection of the company to the whole company that are using Zoom, we went, maybe we should review the security settings. Like, maybe we should pay for the next tier up and get single sign-on. But that's another rant, by the way. Like, why is it that it's the premium packages that companies make us pay for to get security? Like, I have to pay for extra for Slack and Zoom to get freaking single sign-on.
I think security features should be as standard in freemium versions of products. There is not a justification. There is no. Any company that's justifying a security feature being a thing you have to pay for, that's a nonsense. That's like saying, I've bought a BMW, but if I want one that locks, I've got to get the top of the range model. That's absolute nonsense. I can't think of a single example where a car company, to stretch that analogy, where a car company would not give you all of the security features that you would need. The expectation would not be that you have to spend more to get that. I think it's nonsense.
Agreed. The nice thing about this is that Zoom is a very useful tool, and this has drawn a lot of security attention to it. So more researchers are going to be taking a closer look at it, and the outcome of that is only going to be a more secure product at the end of this.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Zoom may not have done the best job themselves, but the security community is forcing them down this route, which is never a bad thing.
The only other thing that we haven't talked about with Zoom is their suspicious Chinese routing. Whether it's actually end-to-end encryption as well.
Oh, I'd read an article that basically flat out said that it's not.
It's not. It's flat out not. So Zoom is saying this was some confusion in their definition of end-to-end, which doesn't match.
End-to-end, apart from the man in the middle.
So what they're saying is their end-to-end is from your end to their end. Not from my
They don't,
end.
they don't get to make the definition.
That's an awful lot of
end to
ends.
end.
This is too many ends in a sentence for me. I don't want to know about anyone's end.
So,
You look after your own end.
so this one again, like this was there was some twisting on this which I didn't like, and I'll get to that in a second. But yeah, so there's two parts to the way. So Zoom does encrypt communication end to end aside. It does actually encrypt. But what it does is it was requesting on occasion those keys from a server in China. So if you were Boris, who we apparently love.
No, that was just a password to the COVID meeting. We're apolitical in this podcast.
If you're Boris and you are setting this up, then it would be possible that your encryption key would be sent from a server in China.
China. A server in China.
China.
That's political as well.
Yeah.
I don't know what you mean.
The second part of this is their choice of encryption. And they were using...
Is it Mickey Mouse?
No, it's not. So it's...
Fisher-Price.
It's completely valid encryption, but it's in what they call a cipher block mode. And there's a nice picture of a Linux penguin where they encrypted it with the same kind of cipher, and you can still, because it's an image and the way the ciphers work and the way they're blocks, you can still make out like the general shape and that it's still a penguin.
UCB versus CBC, love it.
Yeah, so it is, and they made this big headline about
Nautically.
how they
Nautically, it all passed. It was all
Crypto
just
geek
cyber.
nerds
It was all
love
just
it.
cyber nerd stuff.
I can't believe I opened the door to this.
Yeah, it's your fault.
They used a quicker encryption scheme with less overheads. It's still valid encryption. They could be using a much better one, but that would add server processing. And then this brings us into the CIA stuff, not the agency, but the stuff Max was talking about. So availability would decrease if you start to increase the amount of CPU power.
Yeah, sorry, Max, you weren't. I guess I didn't ask the question at the time because I knew what you were talking about. But perhaps you could explicitly describe what you mean by CIA, not the intelligence agency.
Oh yeah. Yes, exactly. Confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and the kind of juxtaposition of each one of them, and how if you want full availability, you cannot have full confidentiality and integrity, and there are attacks against each one. Like a DDoS would be attack against availability, and so it's a way of talking about information security that you can understand how data is kind of secured.
And of course, the way that you described it in the previous example is you're always having to trade off one of those three things because you can never have them all at the same time.
Exactly. So we all wanted availability one day from home for everyone. Therefore, we've got to trade off the fact that all the tools we're using, like House Party or Zoom or whatever, may be less confidential, but we didn't care at the time because we wanted availability and our jobs to keep working the day after something terrible happens to the world.
Just out of interest, I'm assuming that all of the headlines that were about how Zoom encryption works were all to do with China.
Most of them were about the fact that it was in China rather than the encryption, but there were a couple of people talking about the encryption type.
Do you think maybe Zoom's poor encryption has caused the coronavirus?
Let's get over there. Let's get over there and burn those headquarters down.
I bet you could find a conspiracy theory online now.
Now is the time. We're all going to put on our tinfoil hats.
Imagine
have you got yours with you? Yeah.
If Zoom was running over a 5G network, that's it.
Yeah.
Just to bring this back, because there's actually a really interesting tie in there to something that Chris said earlier. So Zoom have fixed this, so you can opt out of specific countries, but only if you've got a paid account.
Oh, come on. They're at it again.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly.
This is where I wanted to give them the benefit of the doubt and wanted to imagine that all of this Zoom hunting was all just media hype. But it seems to be like they are a little bit on the sort of revenue bandwagon, aren't they?
It's a lot of smoke, but there is a fire here as well. Here's an interesting, right? An interesting comparison. WhatsApp, which does video calling and does audio calling, and does a little bit of group. It's not as good as Zoom, I suppose, but does have proper end-to-end encryption.
Which the government want to take away from it.
Yeah, that's right. I remember there was a
Rightly
big
so.
story about that.
All those terrorists.
although can you not talk? Can neither of you talk about that?
Can't talk about it. Obviously.
Can't talk about it.
Yeah.
For all the privacy advocates, I am joking. I believe in it.
But it's a fair point that there's not an excuse that we want this faster. We have really good encryption algorithms that are fast, that work for video calling. So just go, oh well, yeah, we wanted to use a less secure. It's just not an excuse. It's either shoddy, it's either done deliberately or it's just shoddy coding.
Probably be. In fairness,
Max,
probably be.
Max. Anybody, if you want to send the hate mail, it's Max.
Okay, now let's get something. I was going to say more lighthearted. It's not that lighthearted in the context of standing in my garden shed talking to you three.
3 weeks.
Oh,
Sorry.
and now we've just learned it's for an extra 3 weeks. Yeah.
3 weeks.
But I wanted to talk about what are the scummiest COVID-19 scams we have seen out there. I think my personal favorite is probably the testing kits that aren't real. But Paul, I was talking to Paul last week, and he was like, "Seriously, if I got an email for a testing kit, I would buy one." that's what you're up against.
Already.
Did anyone see the news this morning? Nothing to do with cyber, but the cocaine smuggled in face masks this morning.
Oh, well, that would explain one of the other scams, which was face masks for a bargain $399. I suppose your argument's got to be, how many grams is $399 that you can fit in a face mask?
Free Coke with a face mask.
Yeah, the shift would fly by, wouldn't it?
There's been a suggestion that that phishing generally, like phishing emails, are up something like 600%. And all these figures are sort of they're quite, again, it's the media being alarmist again, in my view, because, fish is going to fish. Like, that's what happens. I think the reason that we're seeing a rise is because there is maybe for the first time in 70 odd years, there is a unifying world event that everyone is affected by. And so, of course, naturally, if you're going to do a phishing campaign, you're probably going to do it about that. So I don't think it's all that surprising. I think what's interesting is some of the tactics. Like, there's one of them that I think stoops particularly low with a subject line that suggests you've been infected. Like, the email says, "Oh, you've been in contact with somebody who has been diagnosed with coronavirus. You should download and print this malware-laden Excel file and take it to your doctor or whatever." And of course, it's full of exploits. But some of it's pretty grotty.
It is, and they target the human weakness. And the attackers, this is nothing new for COVID-19. The attackers have always done this. They've always picked whatever's trending in the news or in the world at the time, and they create their themes around it. And arguably, it's the same malware, it's the same attacks. It's just a different theme load over the top. Yeah. And because we're seeing, like I said, this is global, so it's that you can use that one theme everywhere. And with more people working at home, digital communications have shot through the roof, which means more people are going to be exposed to emails, more people are going to see them, and therefore more people are going to report them as well. And Paul's going to
Paul has a look on his face.
I've got excited.
He wants it. It's his moment.
It's my time. It's my moment.
Where's your button?
I didn't have a button. I've lost my button.
And now we just have to pause while I play the jingle.
And now, a word from our sponsors.
We have a lab on this. It's very exciting and it's real. And you can go and actually get hands-on with some of the latest email scams, and you can use those to just see what they're like, but also get your workforce looking at them, understanding the kind of things that the attackers are exploiting, rather than having to wait for that scam to land in your inbox.
Is it one of these? Is it one of these spot the fish ones where you like choose between two, or is it just a view of one?
Just one, and whether it's
just
dodgy.
One, and then you say, is it dodgy or is it not dodgy?
Yeah, we take it a little bit further than that. So we give you these are all real examples. So it's not stuff that we've simulated. They're real world examples, and you select whether you think it's real or not, and then we tell you all the reasons how you can spot whether it was real or not.
Okay. Also interesting that I was looking at some Checkpoint research last week that was saying that registration of domain names related to coronavirus and COVID-19 was up like, I don't know, however many million %, but hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of domains being registered, and half of them are serving up malware. I expect the other half are scams of some kind, but half of those domains are serving up malware. So yeah,
some of them are really, really convincing as well. So like when we were going through the emails, we were analyzing some of this and looking for some of the trends. And if I didn't know, if I wasn't paying attention, like it would be really easy to get tricked by some of those things.
I think it's one of them that
7 testing kits in your house.
I think there's one of them that replicates the official map. You know, the Johns Hopkins University map. It replicates that map, so it launches a site with that map in it. But of course, in the background's dropping all this malware onto your machine.
There's one that clones the entire White House website and pretends to be like genuine official. Like they've got White House headed paper and like in the Word document down. Like some of them are like very convincing.
I mean, this crisis, it's like a perfect storm of a perfect thing for the phishers, isn't it? Really, it's something really emotive. People are dying. Everyone has to be at home. Everyone can't see each other, so has to communicate electronically. It's literally the perfect thing for phishers to get their teeth into, because it's really emotive. They can make sure they get into that inbox some way, and then they know so many more people, including your grandma, is communicating electronically as well, and they're always the people who are going to get hit by this more than anyone else as well. So it is the kind of perfect storm for that.
They just announced that they're going to launch also, and I think that this is the US and the UK. They're going to launch these contact tracing apps. So basically using your phone to determine where you've been and then let you know whether you've likely been in contact with somebody. This to me seems like the most obvious way of phishing people I've ever heard. I just send you an email that says, "Oh, congratulations, you can now get access to this app." And off you go. That seems kind of obvious.
So ignoring the kind of phishing side of that, I've actually seen the spec, and this is being released by both Google and Apple working in partnership together, which is that itself is.
I think it's amazing.
It's genuinely amazing. But this app, which is able to tell you whether you've been near somebody who's infected, they've put like privacy right at the forefront of that. The whole thing is designed to be like completely anonymous. It's all completely opt-in, and you can be running the app and then choose to opt in at any point in the future. I think it's really clever. It's really, really clever.
You know what I think is really interesting about it is that Apple, who's made privacy like it's specific. I mean, Apple products, have their fans for lots of other reasons, but the privacy at the heart of all Apple products is such a key thing for them. To put it's at risk for this case, it shows great leadership by Apple and to partner, and Google, of course. But Google, you'd have expected Google to do it because, of course, it's part of their tech stack. But for Apple to associate and to do it, I mean, looking forward to the results, really.
It's exactly what big tech should be doing right now. They've got the money, they've got the resource, they've got the reach. They should absolutely, and it's such a nice thing to see that they are working together to make this and putting privacy right at the forefront of that. Like you said,
they got all that data. They could be using it not just to advertise stuff to us, but to make us safer, couldn't they? You would think.
Well, I remember I used to teach this where Google had Google flu maps. And Google would track when people would Google symptoms of flu, and every year they brought out I think they were 2 weeks ahead of the CDC. They did some studies on it, and people Googling flu, symptoms would show up. And I think they found the epidemic of flu in Mexico a few years ago. They identified way before they actually thought they had a problem using those flu maps. So I think there's really good open source stuff that you can do as long as it's done with privacy in the right way as well.
I think we're definitely going to see the power. I mean, we're already seeing the power of available data, across this whole during this whole crisis. But I think that something like this, like putting something that is going to be of use to the wider world in the palm of everyone, I think is potentially transformative. They were saying today that they thought they would need at least 80% of the population to be prepared to use those tracking apps in order for it to be able to work. So you'd hope with all those privacy holes filled that maybe it would be at least be able to help. We're headed towards wrapping up, guys, but I want to just finish with just understanding what we think actually some of the most tangible and pressing risks around remote working really are. I know that we've obviously japed about Zoom and stuff like that, but I think it would be good to just perhaps get from each of you, what do you think is the one thing that remote workers could be doing to help keep themselves secure, as tips that our listeners could perhaps pass on? Max?
I think it's the boring password thing, isn't it? A lot of the Zoom calls that have been hacked is because they use same passwords on multiple accounts. Passwords and two-factor. Now we've all got our phones with us most of the time because we're at home. There's no reason why you don't have two-factor and good passwords on things. So
and use password managers because they're good.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. That's my one.
I'm going to say keep it simple. So you've got hundreds of different tools that you could be using for video conferencing, and don't let your organizations use every single one. Frankly, use the one that's embedded. If you're an Office 365 user, use Teams. If you're like a Google one, use Meet. There's only a small number of use cases I personally believe where you should be using something like Zoom or other Cisco WebEx, as if you're if you've heavily invested in that and every single person in your organization is using it. Don't have every single app and every single dialer on you and every single plugin into Chrome. It just increases your security attack surface, and it means that you've got 10 different products to patch all the time.
And finally, Kev.
I'm going to be greedy and take two. So first, privacy, check your settings, make sure that if you don't want your camera, it's not on. If you need a password, put a password on. And secondly, update. These things are being raised. They are releasing patches. So when you see that little bubble in the corner that says there's an update available, click yes, not tomorrow.
That's a great way to end. This has been super weird doing this remotely, but I guess we will just get used to it. That's all from us this week. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please do subscribe, rate, and comment wherever you get your audio content. And if you want to know more about Immersive Labs, you can find us at immersivelabs.com or follow us on Twitter at Immersive Labs UK. Until next time, remotely from all of us, goodbye.